Imagine burying your grandmother. You wash her body. You say your prayers. You lower her into the cold earth and walk home. And 3 nights later, she's at your door. Not a stranger, not some pale aristocrat in a black cape from a distant castle. Her, your own family. Back from the grave, scratching at the walls, trying to get inside to strangle the people she loved most. This is the vampire that real villages were terrified of. Not a Hollywood monster, a dead neighbor who refused to stay dead. And for hundreds of years, ordinary people developed an entire arsenal of weapons, tricks, and rituals to keep the dead in the ground where they belonged. Today, we're opening that toolbox. Garlic, iron, thorns, black horses, hunters born with the power to see the invisible, and the one ritual that wasn't meant to kill a vampire, but to chain it to its own grave forever. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how the old world fought back against the Walking Dead. Hey, before we get into it, welcome. This channel is still finding its people, and if forgotten stories like this one are your thing, hit subscribe and stick around. We're just getting warmed up. Forget everything the movies taught you. In the old folk belief, a vampire was not a seductive nobleman. It was something far more disturbing. A walking corpse. The idea was simple and horrifying. When a person died, their soul was supposed to leave and move on to the next world. But sometimes the soul got trapped. It stayed locked inside a body that refused to rot. And at night, that body would rise. It would leave the cemetery and return to the village it knew. It would attack relatives. It would kill livestock. It would haunt the very home where it once lived. This is what made the vampire so frightening. It wasn't a foreign invader. It was domestic. It was a former neighbor, a husband, a mother, a child, someone who had broken a sacred rule in life, or whose burial had gone wrong in some small but fatal way. So communities had no choice. They built a complete system to fight back. How to prevent a vampire, how to detect one, and how to destroy one. Let's go through it step by step. The battle didn't begin at the cemetery. It began the moment someone died. The most dangerous window was the first 40 days after death. During this period, people believed a wandering soul could still be pulled back into its body, so the body had to be protected, constantly. Rule number 1, a corpse must never be left alone and never left in the dark. Someone always had to be watching. And what were they watching for? Animals. Specifically, they made absolutely sure that no creature, no cat, no dog, no mouse ever jumped over the body. An animal leaping over a corpse was considered a guaranteed trigger. Do that, and you've just created a vampire. Then came the protective measures. People would place garlic in the mouth of the dead or set it on the coffin. They painted dark crosses on doors to block what they called the unclean force from entering. And some of the methods were far more physical. Mourners would prick the skin of the corpse or cut the tendons behind the knees. The logic was grim but consistent. They believed a vampire's body was nothing more than a bloated bag of blood. Damage the skin, and that substance would simply leak out, leaving the corpse unable to rise and walk. In some places, the dead were even buried face down. The reasoning? If the corpse ever tried to claw its way to the surface, it would only dig itself deeper into the earth. But what if prevention failed? What if a village became convinced that a vampire was already out there, walking among them at night? Then they needed to find the grave. And for that, they had detectives, some with hooves, and some born with strange and terrible gifts. The most famous tool was the black horse test. The villagers would take a horse that was completely black, without a single white marking, and lead it slowly through the cemetery. They believed the animal could sense the unnatural. When the horse reached the grave of a vampire, it would stop. It would refuse to step over the cursed ground. That refusal marked the grave. Once they had the grave, they needed someone to deal with what was inside, and not just anyone could do it. You had to be born with a mark. Some people, it was believed, were born with the rare ability to see vampires, creatures that were otherwise completely invisible to ordinary eyes. These were the seers, gifted from birth with sight beyond the living world. But there was an even rarer, even more powerful kind of hunter. According to the legend, when a vampire returned to its widow, it could father children. And these children were not normal. They were said to be born with no shadow, with certain bones missing from their bodies, with unnaturally large heads. And because of these unnatural traits, they were granted unnatural power, the supernatural sight and the raw strength needed to hunt down and destroy their own undead fathers. Think about that. The most feared vampire hunters in the legend were the half-living sons of the monsters themselves. For the average villager, though, survival came down to objects, everyday items believed to naturally repel evil. Let's break down the three big ones. First, garlic. This was the universal shield. Its powerful smell was thought to be completely unbearable to demons. Garlic went into the mouths of the dead, onto coffins, over doorways. If you only had one defense, this was it. Second, iron. Iron was special because of where it came from, the forge, fire and metal and human craft. To these communities, iron represented the order of civilization standing against the chaos of the underworld. A piece of iron was a reminder that the living world had power of its own. But the third weapon was the most specific and the most important. The thorn, especially from the hawthorn tree or from wild briar bushes. People scattered thorns around fresh graves. They pinned them into the clothing of the dead. The purpose was almost mechanical, to catch the vampire and to puncture it. Remember, they believed the corpse was bloated and swollen with blood. A sharp thorn would pierce that swollen body and deflate it like a bladder. And in some regions, a small, sharpened hawthorn stake was driven into the ground right where the dead person's head rested. A quiet, final act meant to pin the soul to the soil. This brings us to the most famous weapon of all, the wooden stake. But here's where almost everyone gets it wrong. In the movies, the stake is a killing weapon. Drive it through the heart and the vampire dies. In the original folklore, that's not what the stake was for at all. Think about it. The vampire was already dead. You can't kill something that's already a corpse. So the stake had a completely different job. It wasn't a weapon, it was an anchor. The goal was to pin the body to the grave so it could never wander again. To nail it in place, to lock it down. The ritual was solemn and carefully timed. The grave was opened during the day, when the vampire was believed to be dormant and powerless. Then the villagers looked at the body. And if they saw the telltale signs, a corpse that was bloated, with a flushed red face, with hair and nails that looked like they had somehow kept growing, then they knew. That's when the sharpened hawthorn stake was driven through the chest or through the stomach. Not to end a life, but to fasten the spirit to the earth. And they believed the power of the hawthorn was absolute. Once that stake was in, even the strongest, most powerful demon could never tear itself free. But the stake had a weakness. It pinned the vampire down, but the body was still there, still in the ground, still a vessel for that trapped, restless soul. So when a village wanted to be absolutely, permanently certain, they turned to fire. Cremation was the final solution, the most radical, the most feared. Fire was seen as a divine cleansing force, something that could destroy the physical body completely and finally set the trapped soul free to move on to the other world. This was not done lightly, and often it was not done legally. Old laws, going back as far as the year 1349, actually punished people for digging up bodies and burning them. But the practice never died out. It continued in secret because villagers believed it was the only way to be truly, completely sure a vampire was gone for good. And in the most extreme, most famous cases, cases that were written down and shocked Europe in the early 1700s, they went even further. The heart was cut out, the body was hacked into pieces. and only then was it given to the flames. Once the corpse was reduced to ash, the ash was scattered to the wind. Sometimes the charred bones were thrown back into the grave and buried all over again, a final guarantee that the broken machine of the vampire could never, ever restart. There's one last category of defense, and it's the strangest of them all. It's about confusion. Tricking the dead. Vampires were closely linked to Crossroads, the places where roads met and split apart. People saw these spots as dangerous seams in the world, points where the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. So to confuse a returning spirit, families would sometimes burn the clothes of the dead at a crossroads, a place so tangled with paths that a wandering soul might lose its way and never find home. And here's the most fascinating part. People believed a vampire could not recognize anything that was reversed or inverted, so families would turn their own clothes inside out, convinced that the demon simply could not approach something that had been flipped. This reversed logic crept into the whole house. If a vampire was suspected nearby, villagers would turn their pots and pans upside down for the night, so the creature would have nowhere to hide, and nothing it could use to announce its presence in the dark. A world quite literally turned upside down to keep the dead away. So why does any of this matter now? Why should we care about garlic and thorns and black horses and clothes turned inside out? Because these were never just superstitions. They were a community's way of drawing a line, a sacred boundary between the living and the dead. Every ritual, from a single Hawthorn thorn pressed into the soil to the burning of a body at a crossroads, came from one deep and human belief, that the soul must be properly sent on its way. And if it wasn't, it would stay. It would linger by the fireplace. It would haunt the home. We don't carry wooden stakes anymore. We don't lead black horses through graveyards. But the echo of that ancient fear is still buried somewhere in our cultural DNA. A reminder of a time when the safety of an entire village depended on the strength of an anchor and the bite of the flame. Here's one way to make sense of it all. Think of these protections like a security system for a spiritual prison. The garlic and the iron are the alarms. They keep the intruder away from the door. The hawthorn stake is the handcuffs. It locks the prisoner to the wall of the cell. And cremation is the demolition of the prison itself. Once the building is gone, there's nowhere left to stay. And the prisoner is finally forced to move on. If you found this as fascinating as I did, hit that subscribe button, because next time we're digging into even darker corners of forgotten folklore. Until then, maybe keep a little garlic by the door, just in case.